Hi BookTube, it's Amy, and since tomorrow is Friday, I guess it's about time that I finally return to you for the first time in many weeks to film a Friday Reads. I have set aside the Proust for now. I'm still midway through Sodom and Gomorrah, but I think I've hit my Proustian limit for at least the next little while. Now, this isn't to say that I wasn't enjoying reading Proust and that I'm not going to return to him and finish him and continue to greatly enjoy his writing. But after 2 months of reading essentially nothing but Proust, I felt the need to pick up some other things. And so last weekend, I picked up a novel that I had had sitting around for a little while by Mabel Manny, a Jane Bond parody called Kiss the Girls and Make Them Spy. And I really did enjoy this one. It is about Jane Bond, James Bond. I know how to talk. James Bond, you know what I mean. About his lesbian sister. And it is set in the 1960s in London, and at the beginning of the novel we find out that Jane has recently been kicked out by her girlfriend, who she's been with for quite a while, because she walked in on her girlfriend in bed with another woman and found out that her girlfriend has been cheating on her with plenty of other women, and she feels a little bit betrayed because her girlfriend, even when they moved into that apartment together, didn't want the neighbors to know that they were a couple. She wanted the neighbors to think that they were just, two single women living together as friends. And Jane Bond is bar hopping and getting drunk and taking random women home with her to this crappy apartment that she's renting when she gets picked up by some associates of her brother, and she gets informed that her brother is in fact ill. It's hinted that he has had a breakdown and is unable to appear before the Queen to collect a medal that has been offered to him. And so that the Queen doesn't know that her top spy is out of the game, they decide to get Jane, who looks a lot like her brother, and dress her up like a man, and parade her in front of the Queen. And so she takes this job with the promise of money, but she ends up getting caught up in a plot to overthrow the Queen and bring back her uncle, who is in exile with his American wife. And so it's quite ridiculous and funny in that sense. My one critique here is that Jane Bond doesn't really do a lot. She's not an active spy. She kind of stumbles into this and stumbles through things, and I would have liked her to take, more of an active role, more of an agent type role in this novel, as opposed to just, being there and stumbling into things. Still quite enjoyable though. So I read that, and once I finished that, I decided on Sunday of last weekend to stop by Chapters and purchase a book. I just really needed to walk into a Chapters and browse and pick something. And so I went to one of my favorite sections. They always have a small shelf at the front of the fiction section, which includes can-lit novels. It's usually just labeled can-lit at the top, and often they are new or recent releases. And so I picked up a novel called Suzanne by Agnès Barbeau-Lavalette, translated by Rhonda Mullins. So this is a French-Canadian novel in translation, translated into English. And I wasn't sure what I was getting here, but the back really drew me in because it is a fictionalized account of a woman named Suzanne, of her life from Montreal to Brussels to New York. And it's mentioned here that she experiences, the Great Depression, growing up in the 30s, Quebec's Quiet Revolution, women's liberation, the American Civil Rights Movement. And so she just sounds like a fascinating woman to read about. And the novel begins from the perspective of her granddaughter, who is really reflecting on the 2 or 3 moments in her life when she actually met her grandmother Suzanne, and reflecting on why her grandmother was the way that she was and why she abandoned her daughter, our narrator's mother, when she was 3 years old and only checked in on her a couple times over the years, and in her old age really didn't want to see her daughter or her granddaughter. And so there's this mystery element, but it's told in a really compelling way. We get these short little segments. Each page is really only a couple of paragraphs. Sometimes it's poetry, or poetry-like, it seems, even if it's not explicitly poetry. And it's about the struggles that her grandmother went through, and in a sense her imaginings of how she must have been thinking and feeling. Her grandmother was born in Ottawa, and at the age of 18 she left her family behind forever to go to Montreal to attend the university there. She was indeed a francophone, which is why she felt that she would be more at home in Quebec. But she goes off to Montreal, hooks up with this man who she eventually marries, and gets involved in this groundbreaking art movement. An art movement that I know was an actual art movement in Quebec and was very much tied to the Quiet Revolution. And the story here is that she didn't sign this manifesto, or she did sign the manifesto, but then changed her mind at the last minute, had her name removed. But then by her mid to late 20s, she has a couple of kids, and for whatever reason, she feels trapped, feels her husband has abandoned her, and off she goes. From lover to lover, from continent to continent. Now, the interesting thing about this novel is that although it's a novel, from reading online a bit about it and from reading the author's acknowledgements and the translator's note and whatnot, you find out that this is loosely based on the author's real experiences. She always wondered, what was her grandmother's backstory. And so she hired a private investigator and dug up what she could. And then almost as a way of processing it, she created this novel, Suzanne, which fictionalizes the way that she thinks things may have been. And this was a 5-star read for me. Absolutely beautiful writing. Great translation, really. I dove through this in less than 24 hours. So I read that, and then I moved on to something that was less interesting. I've had this one on my shelves for a little while. This is one that I picked up secondhand a while back, and that is The Borrower by Rebecca Mackay. It wasn't everything that it could have been. So the premise here is that we have this recent university graduate, and she takes a posting as a children's librarian in a small town somewhere. In this job, she encounters a young boy who everyone in the community believes is gay. And there's kind of a running joke, it's going to be a shock for his conservative Christian parents when they finally realize when he comes out. Of course, the parents do begin to realize, and they send him to this weekly youth group, which is essentially, conversion therapy. And the librarian is concerned for him, but she doesn't really want to interfere because she's warned by several people in her life that, it's not her place to interfere, but she tries to create a safe space for him in this library. She sneaks him books that he's not allowed to read, things like Roald Dahl. It seems like all his mother wants him to read are things that are holy. And all is fine and dandy until she comes into the library one morning and finds that this 10-year-old boy has run away from home and spent the night hiding in the library. And one thing leads to another, and soon they are off in her car going cross country. And she is kind of she's sort of a kidnapper, but in a sense he kidnapped her as well, although that wouldn't really hold up in court. But there's some weird stuff going on, like she discovers her father's Russian mob connections, and that, subtly helps them to get through this. It's a little odd that that's just kind of there, thrown out. The author makes an effort to include, a lot of literary references because it's about a librarian. Within the first chapter, there is a reference to Lolita, which I think is, an odd reference to make, considering there was absolutely nothing sexual in this novel between the main character librarian and this young boy who may or may not be gay. And there's just like random passages where the author is drawing on famous literary works, references to The Wizard of Oz. And I mean, it's not horrible, but I wasn't interested the whole time. And especially the ending, it was a bit of a cop-out because nothing like this in real life would ever end that way. Also the fact that the main character manages to get 2 library jobs, first in this small town and then elsewhere, without having a degree in library sciences. Just kind of strange. So I read that. Now I'm working on 2 separate books right now that I also purchased in the last couple of days. I wanted to read some short stories, so I picked up a collection that was on the Scotiabank Giller Prize long list, and that is Solitude by Paige Cooper. And I wish I had read up some more about it online before purchasing it, because I've noticed that some reviewers have said, this collection really is quite confusing. It's difficult to get through the stories and understand them. And at this point, I agree. I've read 2. The first one, Solitude, which is about a woman who is in love with another woman who's currently in another country, and she has sent this woman a plane ticket and is waiting for her to arrive at the airport, and she's not sure whether her lover is going to come or not. And then we've got Spider Hole, kind of an odd title, and to be honest, I didn't get this one at all. I was just left utterly confused, but I think I will read on. The next one here is called Ryan and Irene and Ryan. Hopefully it will make more sense to me than Spider Hole. So I'll read some more of that this weekend. But then I also picked up one that I started on my lunch break, and this is the Beirut Hellfire Society by Roy Hage. I'm sure if you're watching BookTube or paying attention to any recent book publications, you will have heard of this one. I've been sort of interested in it. It is about a man whose father was part of the secret society that takes care of the dead and gives them kind of a proper send-off when proper burial is denied to them for one reason or another. I'm not very far in, but I did get to the point where our main character, let me see, what was his name? You'll have to forgive me, I was reading this over lunch. Our main character, Pavlov, is just witnessing the death of his father. In fact, his father is killed in a bombing during a civil war in Lebanon. So I'm interested to get more onto this. I've heard mixed reviews of this one.